Good evening, and welcome everyone to another one of our webinar series by the Black Legal Action Center or Blackout Hate Project. Good evening and welcome. We'll just give a minute for other people to file in and we'll go right ahead and start. Okay, so I see we have some participants here. So in the interest of everyone's time, I think I'll just go ahead and start. So welcome again to our webinar series. Our topic today is we're going to be discussing unmasking white supremacy in Canada's polite society. We'll be taking a deeper look at anti-Black hate. My name is Don Parchment. I'm a lawyer, and I am one of two lawyers in this project. The other one is my colleague Natasha, and we also have our facilitator Adrian. The Blackout Hate Project is an initiative by Canadian Heritage, and it is funded by the Government of Canada and hosted by the Black Legal Action Center. While this presentation is made possible through the support of those organizations, the views and opinion expressed within this presentation are solely those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the official policies, position, or endorsement of the Government of Canada or Canadian Heritage. Neither Canadian Heritage nor the Government of Canada assumes any responsibility for the content of this presentation. In further disclaimer, there will be discussions of laws and legal concepts throughout this presentation. This does not intend to create legal advice, and it does not create a lawyer-client relationship. This session will be recorded as well, and it will be made available on the Black Legal Action Center website. We will continue by acknowledging the land that we're on. We're on the ancestral traditional territories of the Ojibwe, the Anishinaabe, and in particular, the Mississauga of the Credit. This territory is part of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. It is also covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. Today, Toronto, the traditional Mohawk name for this area called Toronto, and its surrounding areas are still home to Indigenous people. I am grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. I also acknowledge the many people of African descent who are not settlers, but those whose ancestors were forcibly displaced as part of the transatlantic slave trade, brought against their will and made to work on these lands. Indigenous sovereignty is deeply and inextricably linked to Black liberation, and I will continue to mobilize and take action in solidarity with Indigenous people and the communities. Lastly, we'll do some housekeeping before we go ahead. The audience will remain muted throughout the presentation, and we will leave room for questions in the chat. If you have any technical issues or questions, please feel free to private message our host. The name is Black Legal Action Center, and they will do their best to support you. We also ask that you remain respectful in the chats, as any rude or offensive language will result in removal from the presentation. Also, as a part of our audience engagement, we'll be using Mentimeter for audience engagement and to evaluate the session. So throughout the presentation, please feel free to visit Menti on your computer and smartphone. The instruction should be on your screen now, menti.com, and the code to access is right there. You can use that to access Mentimeter. In fact, now is probably a good time to try it out, as we will be accessing Menti very soon as part of your engagement. So for today's overview and objective, we'll be looking at identifying, responding, and coping, also overcoming and reporting anti-Black hate. The structure that we'll go to today, we'll look at some definitions. We'll look at anti-Black hate. We'll look at the intersection of anti-Black hate and white supremacy groups. We'll look at some myths versus reality, the impact of racial trauma, and we will end on resistance and resilience. So we'll get right into it. When you think of hate and white supremacy, what comes to mind? And do you think it happens here in Canada? So this is a Menti moment. You can go to Mentimeter so I can get your feedback and response. When you think of hate and white supremacy, what comes to mind? Do you think that we experience this in Canada? We'll be discussing this. There's no wrong answers, just participation. Okay, so we have yes, we do. So we have agreement that we experience anti-Black hate in Canada anymore. Okay, people who don't think that racism is a thing in 2025, yes, it is a form of institutional discrimination. Great answers. So I like these answers because we'll be discussing, these are some points that we'll be discussing. Okay, in the chat, yes, we experience this in Canada. Okay, so I have a good temperature of the group. So that's very good. Thank you for your participation. So here's the thing. Although Canada is known for politeness and diversity, anti-Black hate has quietly but consistently increased, and white supremacist groups have become more organized and more visible. Now, bear in mind that the purpose of this presentation is to raise awareness and to equip people with understanding and tools to respond to anti-Black hate. It's not to spread fear. So what is hate? We'll do one more Minty moment. What is hate? What do you view hate to be? Let's have the response. What do you view hate to be? In your opinion, what do you think hate is? You can also use a chat if you want to. Blaming problem on others. That's a good point. We'll be talking about that exact point as we go along. So we'll move on. Okay, so when we talk about hate, according to the newly proposed Combating Hate Act, hate is an emotion that involves detestation or vilification. It is stronger than mere disdain or dislike. So the Combating Hate Act is a proposed Canadian law that seeks to amend the criminal code to address hate-motivated behavior by creating new offenses and strengthening the existing one. So it aims to criminalize certain public displays of hate symbols. It prohibits intimidation and obstruction of access to specific places like place of worship, and it allows for a harsher penalty when any crime is committed with hate-motivated intent. So now that we have an understanding of what hate is, let's turn our attention to anti-Black hate. Now, anti-Black hate is different from racism, and the difference lies in the severity and the nature of the conduct. While anti-Black racism manifests as discrimination through sometimes expressed but more often subtle or subconscious biases, anti-Black hate, on the other hand, refers to extreme forms of expressions or motivations that meet higher level legal thresholds. So the level we're talking about is detestation and vilification, which we're going to talk about coming up. While anti-racism takes on a much more covert display, anti-Black hate, on the other hand, is expressed by extreme forms of action, like I said earlier, that typically meet higher legal threshold. But what does that look like, though? What it actually look like in everyday life? It is sometimes manifested in expressions such as hate speech, propaganda, which we're going to talk about, physical violence, threats, and hate crime. And it's important to bear in mind that these actions are fueled by prejudice against people of African, Black, and Caribbean descent. Now, if you take a look at your slide, you will see a graph showing reports of hate crime for 2024. And on the right side, you will see the things that I just discussed: hate speech, propaganda, physical violence, threats, and hate crime. So these are expressions of hatred. On the right in the graph, you'll notice that verbal abuse and insults are one of the leading expressions of hate. You'll also notice that the second most reported hate incident is threats to cause injury and pain and physical assault. Now, as I said, these are fueled by prejudice against Black, African, and Caribbean people. So previously, racial discrimination was more systemic and wasn't as blatant and as direct as we see today. From this article, we observe discrimination being manifested as direct assault and use of offensive slur directly to the victim's face, and there is no more hiding behind scenes. Laws and policies are being discreet in the manner in which discrimination is expressed. We'll go ahead and we'll look at this article. So in this article, what happened was there's a 20-year-old woman in Hamilton. She was walking and she was pounced upon by a vehicle. She was called names and she was referred to with racial slurs, and ultimately she was assaulted. So these are the things that we see how hate is expressed nowadays. So we're going to play a little game. We're going to play Word Ninja. It's like Fruit Ninja, but if you had early Android devices, you would have this game called Fruit Ninja, but we're playing Word Ninja. We're going to look at some words and we're going to look at some legal concepts. We're going to dissect them to see how we come to a particular act being an act of hate. So under the Combating Hate Act, like I mentioned earlier, hate means detestation or vilification, and it's much stronger than simply not liking someone. According to Webster's dictionary, detestation is extreme hatred or dislike. So an extreme feeling would lead to an extreme action. Most of us would agree, right? So if someone assaults another person because they dislike them, that assault becomes an extreme expression of their dislike, which amounts to hate. In other words, it crosses the line into detestation, which matches both the dictionary meaning and the standard under the Combating Hate Act. The second key word in the Combating Hate Act is vilification. Now, according to the Oxford Dictionary, vilification means absolutely disparaging speech or writing. And disparaging means words of insult, degrade, or suggest that somebody is of little worth. Now let's apply this to the incident. The victim was subject to name calling and racial slurs. Racial slurs are, by definition, derogatory and degrading, which clearly fits the meaning of vilification. So under the proposed act, this behavior meets the legal standard for hate because it involves explicit detestation and vilification. Vilification, things said or written; detestation, action or things done. So we see both criteria were met in this incident of hate. Also note that as per the definition we look at, an expression of hate can be things done or written, which is vilification, and action, which is detestation, like I mentioned. All right, let's look at another incident. And I also welcome your participation this time. So if you didn't get to participate the last Menti time, I welcome your participation this time. And I want you, the participation in the group, to tell me which of the two characteristics is met in this incident of hate.
A woman is facing charges in connection with two suspected hate-motivated harassment incidents aboard TTC buses in North York. Well, police have arrested 34-year-old Geneviève Riest yesterday. She is charged with criminal harassment. According to the investigation, she allegedly made harassing comments to youths on a bus in late October and again in mid-November. Both alleged incidents happened near Bathurst and Shepherd. Riest is scheduled to appear in court next month.
So we'll go to Menti. So we mentioned vilification, we mentioned detestation as part of definition for hate. So based on this incident, you can tell me which of the two do you think it falls under, vilification or detestation? Okay, we have 6 replies. Just wait 2 more minutes, well, 1 more minute for any other reply. Awesome. Okay, great. That is very good. So vilification is the correct answer. So vilification, when it comes to hate, and according to the Combating Hate Act, vilification takes care of things that are written or expressed, things that are written or said, while detestation is action, like things that are done. So very good, and thank you once again for participating there. So anti-Black hate is not just expressed on an individual basis anymore, as seen in the preceding 2 examples. Anti-Black hate is now on a larger organized scale, employing the resources of thousands of individuals in the form of groups. On the screen is a recent headline showing how white nationalist groups are organized, emboldened, and are growing. It went on to further discuss how the movement is now consolidated into networks, including branches. So when we hear of networks and branches, we think of big conglomerate like banks and multi-million dollar businesses. But today, we're talking about groups formed with the sole purpose of promoting and perpetuating hatred. Before we dissect this group to see how it meets the definition of hate, let us debunk something. Someone may say, but Mr. Speaker, nothing is wrong with people forming groups. In fact, it is one of our protected constitutional rights according to Section 2C of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom, which is our freedom of peaceful assembly. Now, I'd say to you that you're absolutely correct. One's freedom of peaceful assembly is guaranteed. However, like any other rights in the Charter, it is not absolute and it is subjected to limits of law, provided they are reasonably prescribed and demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. And you can find this in Section 1 of the Charter. So if you were at the last presentation on Know Your Rights, my colleague Natasha did an awesome job at this juncture where she breaks down this information about how your rights are limited by Section 1 of the Charter. And so if you want to learn more about the limits on constitutional rights, I implore you to take a look at the recording once it is made available on the website. Nonetheless, in simple terms, all this is saying is that our constitutional rights are not absolute and are only guaranteed to the extent that it does not infringe on any other laws. The limits are further qualified to be reasonably prescribed by law and justified. So if we turn our attention to the current slide, while these groups are within their constitutional right, on the face of it, the agenda and actions of the group subsequently triggers the Section 1 limitation. So now let's look at how the actions of these groups trigger the Section 1 limitation of our charter. Diagolon, for example, is one branch of a white supremacist group, and they are called the propaganda arm, according to the excerpt. Now, their work is in broadcasting, and they do this several times per week. And by doing this, they make hateful speech, angry conspiratorial reactions to weekly news, and sometimes even death threats. They call for ethnic cleansing and genocide. I also mention and speak about genocide in one of our previous webinars. I also implore you to look at that if you have a chance. Now, propaganda is a hate crime if it advocates for genocide, if it promotes hatred against an identifiable group through words, signs, or visible representation, as outlined in the criminal code under Section 319. Hate crime is promoting hatred against an identifiable group through words and making calls for ethnic cleansing or deliberate or blatant advocacy for genocide, both of which the Diagolon are actively doing. So now we see the new face of anti-Black hate and racial hate on a whole. It's no longer subtle innuendos that leave us wondering if that was a racial influence situation. It's now blatant attack on people of color, racial slurs fueled by prejudice, and large organized groups with the sole purpose of promoting hate. So this group's network also include two additional arms, which is one is called Dominion Society of Canada, which is an incorporated political arm. And the other is called Second Sons Canada, which we're going to talk about later. And they also have active clubs. And these are the militant arm of the movement. So you see that they're very organized groups, very large groups. So let's look at why is anti-Black hate growing in Canada. One of the things that influenced the growth of anti-Black hate in Canada is global events that influence local attitudes. For example, we consume a lot of US media every day. A generous amount of Canadians watch American TVs, YouTube creators, and social media trends. And as a result, when the US has racial conflicts, police brutality, and political divisions, and white supremacist marches, Canada sees all of this online in real time. And this shapes the conversation that we have here in Canada. See, the thing about hate is that it spreads across borders easily due to the internet and the online interface. White supremacist groups don't stay in one country. They share the same online spaces. They use the same hashtags. They post the same memes and they recruit Canadians just the same way as they recruit Americans or other nationalities. So someone in Toronto can be influenced by contents coming from Texas, for example, or Florida, or Europe, or Australia, because the internet makes hate global. So that is one of the reasons why we see hate and hate crime and white supremacist groups proliferate in Canada. Another thing is when other countries get polarized, Canadians get influenced as well. If the US, for example, is heavily divided on issues like immigration and policing, Black Lives Matter, and topics surrounding LGBTQ plus rights, these debates spill into Canada as well. People here begin repeating the same talking points, the same conspiracy theories, and they share the same fears, the same online arguments. So even if the situation in Canada is different, the attitude gets imported. Like I mentioned before, extremist movements coordinate internationally. It doesn't stay one place. So many white supremacist groups in Canada follow US leaders. They copy US tactics. They attend international online meetings and share each other's contents. So when these movements rise in one country, they tend to rise in another country as well. Now, this is not to say that Canada doesn't have its own genesis and history of racism that fuel hate in the country, because we do. However, the outside realities does influence the atmosphere here as it relates to the rise in hate and hate crime. As an example, how many of you remember when George Floyd was killed in the US? Canadians protested, and Canadian police practices came under heavy scrutiny. Anti-Black hate comments increased online, and people in Canada picked sides in debates happening in the US. So even though the event happened there in the US, the impact was felt here as well. So this is a solid example of how global events influence the attitude locally in Canada. Now, let's look at a few things happening within our own borders that contribute to the growth of anti-Black hate in Canada. One of the things are economic anxiety, which is exploited by certain groups. So there's a direct relationship between the current economic condition and the prevalence of anti-Black hate in Canada. What you'll find is that with the rise in economic uncertainty comes also a rise in anti-Black hate in Canada. You might ask, how is that? This is because hate groups feed on poor economic condition. They use it as a catalyst to further their hate agenda. So when people are feeling worried about jobs or money and their future, they become vulnerable and more susceptible to influences. Some groups will take advantage of this fear, and instead of helping the situation, these groups redirect their frustration towards racial or ethnic minorities. So they will then push ideas like immigrants are taking over our jobs or Black people are getting special treatment. Why then that is why we struggle. They will share ideas like Canada is changing too fast and it's hurting you, or your economic problems are caused by others. The problem is that these messages are emotionally powerful, especially in a state of vulnerability, because it gives a simple explanation for complicated problems. They give people someone to blame, and most importantly, they make people feel as part of a group that understands their struggle. Imagine, for example, someone losing their job at a factory or their workplace. Now, that person would be evidently stressed out and feeling powerless. Then they go online on their social media and it comes up in their feed, a white nationalist group posting, Canadian jobs are being replaced because the government prioritizes immigrants. Join our movement to protect Canadian jobs. Now, suddenly, that person feels seen, that person feels supported, and naturally they're angry at the cause. They feel like they're being dealt with unfairly. So this is how economic stress turns into racial resentment if someone is able to manipulate it. And we find this happens with white supremacy groups. Now, most Canadians never learn real Black history in school, and this is another internal factor that aids the growth of anti-Black hate. The thing is that when people don't know Canadian history, they don't understand today's issue. And this makes it easy for stereotypes and misinformation to spread. Black students, for example, don't see themselves reflected, which affects confidence and belonging. So without education, many believe racism is not a Canadian problem, which allows anti-Black hate to grow. And remember that hate grows in silence. So when people don't talk about hate, it creates space for harmful ideas to feel normal. Now, you may ask yourself, but is anti-Black hate really growing though? What authority do I have to say that anti-Black hate is growing? If you look at your slide, you'll see the bars on the right. Now, the blue bars represent 2019 and the black bars represent 2023. And this is from Statistics Canada 2025, by the way. So the blue bars are representative of 2019 and the black bars are 2023. If you look at any particular racial group, you will see that the black bars are higher than the blue bar, and that is the rate of which hate crimes have been reported over the past years. What is even more important about this display is that the bar at the very top of the display represents the Black community. And you'll notice that's the highest recorded incidence of anti-Black hate over the past years. Right below that, you have other race, you have the Asians, indigenous people, white and other races. But if you notice, Black account for the highest incidence of hate reported crime over the past years. So it is indeed that anti-Black hate is growing in Canada. Understanding the rise of white supremacist group, we're going to take a look at that. Who are these groups and how do they recruit? These groups are highly sophisticated groups that are well organized, like I mentioned earlier. We're not talking about random individuals with racist views. We're talking about structured network of people who work together both online and in person to spread hate and recruit other persons. These groups usually have leaders or influencers. They operate by rules or codes, and they frequent the online communities. So communities like forums, chats, and encrypted apps. They frequent those forums, and they also share common ideology. You'll find that they operate more like clubs or teams than isolated individuals, and they generally promote the idea that white people are superior. Now, these groups tend to target racialized groups like the Black community, immigrants, Muslim Jews, the LGBTQ plus people. These white supremacist groups have an agenda, and like any other well-organized entity, they recruit and they actively do so. They recruit on online gaming platforms and social media platforms, Facebook groups, and what they do, they tend to target the young and impressionable minds. They actively try to bring people in by posting on social media comment sections and creating videos and podcasts and Patreon content using memes and coded language, and by targeting people who feel frustrated and angry or left out. So recruitment, you'll find that it often looks friendly at first, but then it becomes more extreme over time. They are often disguised and are very unsuspecting, presenting themselves very well, often not in white hoods today, but it looks like proud traditional groups, nationalist clubs, and freedom rallies. Modern white supremacist groups rarely call themselves racist. Instead, they use terms like patriot groups and freedom groups and nationalist clubs and proud heritage groups. The reason why this is done is it is meant to look less threatening and to make recruitment easier. All right, so we'll look at another news report. This is a demonstration by the second one that I mentioned earlier.
The information we got Monday was that this was a group by a different name. So thank you to those who reached out and correctly identified them as Second Sons. Now, their public display in London on Sunday was short-lived, but it attracted no shortage of attention.
Those are the medals of my father-in-law.
Ian Haley points with pride to the medals of those who served before him. A retired lieutenant colonel himself, when he learned a white nationalist group demonstrated in London, he was not impressed.
Even idiots have the right to
to protest. Should they go beyond that, then we have democratic courts. Those who portray Nazi views probably would not have been treated as kindly protesting against the government of Nazi Germany.
This is dashcam video that appears to show a group of about 30 people dressed in dark uniforms and masks. They're standing in formation on the Wortley Road overpass, holding a banner that reads "Remigration Now."
This fascist type demonstration just is a selfish way of trying to live your life.
Brian Harris is also a retired lieutenant colonel with the Canadian Forces.
The only people who aren't really immigrants to this country are the indigenous people. Everyone else is an immigrant or the children of immigrants.
The demonstration only lasted about 20 minutes, according to police. Brief but provocative. It comes at a time when the white nationalist movement is reportedly the largest it has ever been in Canada. And the Canadian Anti-Hate Network says Second Sons is not to be taken lightly.
They are preparing for what they see as the necessary use of violence to protect their political movement, attack their opposition, and ultimately carry out what their agenda is, which is ethnic cleansing in Canada. The leaders talk about how they want to enact mass deportations of people who aren't white and European.
We reached out to Second Sons with an interview request, but had not heard back before broadcast deadline. As for the demonstration on Sunday, police have said that no laws were broken and no charges were laid. Brian Bicknell, CTV News.
As you can see, that their motive was what you call remigration. So remigration is a term that you may come across with white nationalist groups. And like I mentioned before, they are directly attacking immigrants because their idea is to support white nationalism and pure European and white people for Canada. So we'll move on to the other one. So we're going to look at now the link between anti-Black hate and white supremacist group. Where does the link come about? And I'm going to refer to this case, R versus, well, in this case, it's a King versus Matthew Altarp. So Matthew Altarp pleaded guilty recently to 3 terrorism offenses in relation to his role in filming, publishing, and distributing propaganda and recruitment videos. So I spoke about propaganda and recruitment earlier. And he did this for a group called the Atomwaffen Division, which is a branch of a white nationalist group. It's the military accelerationist and the white supremacist terrorist group. He also was involved in writing, editing, and publishing manifestos or instructions guide for another group, which is called Telegram. And that group is another international militant accelerationist white supremacist group. The concern is that the nature of the information in these videos and manifestos, these manifestos and videos that Mr. Altarp admittedly and willfully promoted hatred against a number of identifiable groups, and that include Black persons. And he did this for the benefit of terrorist groups. This matters because it shows anti-Black hate is not incidental. It is central to extremist ideology. It demonstrates the connection between hate propaganda and white supremacist group, and it also underscores the need for legal and policy responses recognizing anti-Black hate is a driver for violent extremism. The photo on your screen is a publication of another white nationalist group, a part of the Telegram. And if you look at the very bottom, you will notice a call for total nigger death. And the slogan of this group is "Do it for the gram." If you look all the way to the bottom, that white writing to the bottom left, it says total nigger death. So these are the things that the white nationalist group perpetuate. And if they advocate for genocide or the eradication of one group of people, then now it's elevated to hate crime level. So as we mentioned before, vulnerable people are easily influenced. People feeling angry at the world are susceptible to influence and are easy target for white supremacist group. Another reason why people are pulled in or recruited by this group is for the purpose of love and belonging. Now, in Maslow's hierarchy of need, Maslow's well-known psychological theory explains that people are motivated to meet higher needs in a sequence, which from basic survival to higher psychological growth. The first two levels in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs are physiological needs and safety. And these must be largely satisfied before someone can focus on higher needs. When these basic needs aren't met, then people often struggle to meet the next stage, which is finding friendship and belonging and family and connection, which is also essential for the progress to the higher levels, which are esteem and self-actualization. So people naturally have a psychological need for love and belonging, and sometimes it is found in the most accessible places like the groups or presents themselves when people are most vulnerable. So this need for love and belonging is one of the reasons why people are easily pulled into these type of groups, especially when they are feeling vulnerable. Also, some people are drawn in by misinformation, not fully understanding the nature or the movement of what they are joining. So, and oftentimes it is already too late when people actually realize the gravity of the situation that they are now a part of. Another reason why people find themselves a part of this group is what is called fear-based politics. And fear-based politics is when groups or influencers try to gain support by making people feel scared instead of giving real solution to problems. Fear is often used to control opinions, control votes, and emotions. So they will push messages like immigrants are taking over and Black people are getting unfair advantage or crime is rising because of newcomers and they're losing their country. So these are the messages that are often not true, but fear makes them feel real. And once people feel scared and angry, they become more open to joining extremist groups, believing conspiracy theories, and supporting aggressive policies and acting out of hateful behavior. So fear makes prejudice feel justified. We will look at some myths versus reality. A lot of people believe that white supremacy does not exist in Canada. And we went through some slide earlier to debunk that. So now we'll ask a question. How many white supremacist groups do you think exist in Canada? We'll just go to Menti and we will welcome your response. There's no wrong or right answer, it's just participation. Just by guessing, how many white supremacist groups do you think exists in Canada? Awesome. Over 100. So if you put 100 plus, then you are indeed correct. So myth versus reality. White supremacist group doesn't exist in Canada. That is a strong myth. But the reality is that data collected suggested that there are at least 100 white supremacist group and neo-Nazi groups across Canada, and another 30,000 individuals involved in sovereignist cause. Now, this data is actually from 2016, and there is updated data for this. We'll move to the other myth. The other myth is that some people believe it's only a few angry individuals and it's not really that big. But between 2016 and 2021, white supremacist hate groups have expanded and proliferated throughout Canada, growing from about 100 that we saw earlier in 2015 to roughly 300 groups by 2021. And this is according to National Council of Canadian Museum. Well, if you look at the statistics, you'll realize that there are about 33 new groups per year on average between 2016 and 2021. And this data actually does not account for the last 4 years. So we see that indeed, there are numerous white supremacist groups and individuals, and they are indeed growing. Another myth that we come across is that many people believe that talking about anti-Black hate actually creates divide and division. This is quite the opposite, as ignoring the anti-Black hate allows for hate to grow unchecked. When people stay silent or look away or pretend hate doesn't exist or happen, it creates the perfect environment for hate to grow stronger. Hate doesn't need approval to grow. It only needs people to ignore it. We look at another myth. The other myth is that some people may say, well, anti-Black hate doesn't affect me. Now, I was speaking to a group of students a week ago about entrepreneurship and how racism and hate make success look different for people of color. There's one student that expresses gratitude that he has never experienced an act of racism or hate, and that it doesn't affect him thus far. While he has never personally experienced racism or acts of hate, and while there might be some of us who share similar sentiments, unfortunately, we are all still affected by anti-Black hate, albeit not having experienced it firsthand. This is why I say that. One of the most obvious culminating effect of anti-Black hate is community. Community feel less safe when there's presence of anti-Black hate. This fear over time has a significant effect on our physical and our social existence. Secondly, our children are affected in that they internalize negative message about who they are, and these message subconsciously affect decision making, and it tend to perpetuate generation after generation. Ultimately, society continue to become more divided. When racism and hate increase and people don't address it, the result is a society where people stop trusting each other, stop connecting, and stop seeing each other as equal. This weakens our community and create deep separation between groups. And also, now that when that happens, it becomes a us versus them situation. For example, in some supremacist group, you will see real Canadian versus other Canadians, when it should be just one Canada and one people. Hate is like wildfire. If you don't put it out early, everyone gets burned. So now that we know what anti-Black hate is, what it looks like in real time, and the fact that it affects everyone, what then should we do when faced with incidents of anti-Black hate? If you should become a victim of anti-Black hate, the first thing you want to do is document everything. You want to keep detailed record of all incidents, including date, time, specific comments, words, action, and name of witnesses, and name of perpetrator. Should the incident take place electronically or online, you are also encouraged to save emails, save messages, or take photos of any drawing, etc. that might be racially offensive. Never be afraid to report these incidents. You may think that it doesn't help or change anything, but when you report incidents of hate, it brings us closer to solving the epidemic than if it's not reported at all. Bringing racial hate to the forefront is the only way to bring awareness to the deed and the devastation that it has on victims' physical and emotional life. And if you're unsure about a situation, always seek legal advice. Another recommendation is, if the racial action is based in a human right violation only, victims should always consider filing a complaint with the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal. If it's elevated to the level of hate crime, then you want to file a complaint with your local police, which we're going to discuss later. And if you're not sure, like I said earlier, seek legal advice. So in our homes, we should always teach our children fairness, kindness, and what anti-Black hate looks like. Children are not born racist. They learn it from the world. Kids pick up on tones, attitudes, fear, and stereotype, and even silence from the adults around them. So teaching them fairness and kindness early prevents harmful attitude from forming in the first place. Teaching what hate looks like helps children to recognize and reject harmful behavior, whether doing it themselves or having it done to them. This does not mean that we should expose our children to graphic violence. It means that we should help them understand why certain words are harmful, why it is wrong to treat someone differently because of their skin color, why bullying based on someone's race look like and why we shouldn't do it, why stereotype unfair, or why is it important to speak up or get help, as this creates children who can notice hate and not participate in it. Also in our workplaces, we need to support anti-hate training. We need to speak up when someone is mistreated. Most workplaces offer diversity training on paper, but supporting anti-hate training means actively valuing it, not just attending it because it is required. This includes taking training seriously instead of just clicking through slides, for example. Support means listening and asking questions, reflecting on biases, and understanding how hate shows up in our own community. This is quite the same as all of you today taking the initiative to come to the webinar to listen and learn about anti-Black hate. Most importantly, hate is prevalent online, and we want to report hate contents online. We also don't want to share misinformation, and we want to support positive story about Black communities. Most hate today is spread online and not in the street. When you report hate, it slows down the recruitment process, it stalls hate groups, and it protects vulnerable people. Now let's look at where we can report incidents of hate crime or hate incidences. For those of you who are in Toronto, as you can see on the screen, for incidents of threat, violence, or harassment, or racist incidents that may be criminal, you want to call your emergency number 911. If you deem it as a non-emergency, you want to call the non-emergency line. When you call, you want to ask for the hate unit, and you also want to note that the incident involves hate targeting a specific racial group, if that is the case. If you're not in Toronto and you're in other cities like Hamilton, so forth, you want to call the 911 or you want to call your local police as well. We also have the Canadian Anti-Hate Network for hatred online, such as white supremacist group activities that amount to anti-Black hate or other form of hatred, or extremist propaganda or harassment. You want to contact Canadian Anti-Hate Network online. You want to report groups that are online purporting this form of hatred. So also City of Toronto 311 hate activity reports. You can also report your things like graffiti, racist poster, flyer, any symbols, slurs, or hate incidents as well can be reported using the 311 hate activity report. Social media is another place where hate is seen a lot. Places like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X, and YouTube. These platforms all allow reporting of hate speech and racist content. And also Black-led communities like the Black Legal Action Center that we're doing now, you can call to report incidents of hate. I'll show you an example of how to report hate online. So this is an example of Instagram. Most of the other social media site looks the same way. So if you look to the bottom right, you'll see 3 dots in a line. If you right there, yeah, if you click on those dots, it will pop up the middle screen, those options. You see that big red box that says report. If you click on that, then you will get the option of the type of incident you want to report. You want to look for the one, that one that says violence, right there, violence, hate, exploitation. You want to click on this one and you want to report it. This is an example from Instagram, but it looks pretty much the same on Facebook, X, YouTube, so forth. Why does it matter to report incidents of hate crime and hate incidents? When you report these incidents, the platform remove content faster, which reduces the reach of hate groups and protect young people from online radicalization. This also sends a message to hate group that hate is not welcome, and it slows down the cycle of misinformation and violence. What are some of the things you're looking out for that you want to report? You're looking out for offensive slurs. You're looking out for threats towards Black communities, white supremacist propaganda. You're looking out for accounts that push violence or racial hatred. You're looking out for recruitment posts or extremist groups. You're looking out for racist memes or coded language, some of which we're going to discuss now. How do you identify coded language from racist groups? So these numbers, they represent some things. And when you're on social media, you can look out for them if you suspect that a particular post is of a hatred nature. So 14, for example, this refers to 14 words, and the words that it refers to is we must secure the existence of our people and the future for white children. If you read that sentence, it's 14 words that are in it, and it's a central white supremacist slogan. And so they use the word 14 within their circle as a coded language. Also, the number 88. So the letter H is the 8th letter of the alphabet. And so the H in Hail Hitler represent 88 because it's 2 H's. And so 8 and 8 represents Hail Hitler. And so if you come across this number and you suspect that is a hate group or a white supremacy group, it probably is. Some groups put the two numbers together, 1488, and this is a combination of the first two expressions, and this is used to signal hardcore neo-Nazi or white supremacist alignment. 1828-38, these numbers are also seen, and basically it goes by where the letter falls corresponding to numbers. So A is the first letter of the alphabet, which represents 1, and H is the 8th one. So 18, Adolf Hitler, and you have the second one, 28, blood, honor, and combat. So you get the picture. So these numbers are seen online, and you can use these to identify if or verify if a particular group is recognized hate groups. Some of the other things you want to look out for are slogans or words or sentences like the Great Replacement. So the Great Replacement is a more modern version of white genocide, and it suggests that white people are being replaced. It is used in manifestos and extremist recruitments. Another phrase you want to look out for is take our country back. This is used heavily in Canadian far-right movements, and it means it's a coded call to return Canada to a white majority traditional identity and resist immigration, refugees, and multiculturalism. It is often used alongside anti-Black and anti-immigrant and anti-Indigenous rhetorics. I also mentioned this earlier in the presentation, real Canadian / true Canadians. This sounds innocent, but in extremist circles, it means white Christian English-speaking Canadians only. It is used to exclude Black Canadians, Indigenous people, immigrants, and refugees, anyone not fitting a white nationalist ideal. We want to join community groups because this promotes inclusions. Here are some groups that you can join. Seek to join your local anti-racism community. You can often find these in your municipalities or your libraries. For those of us who have children at school, we want to join our Parent Teachers Council, and we do this to advocate for inclusive curriculums. We want to look for Black-led community organizations like mentorship programs, youth, sports, homework clubs, intercultural or multicultural groups that connect diverse communities for support, online groups and forums that promote respectful dialogue and education. It helps to join these groups because it creates allies and collective action. It helps to push policy changes in schools, on school boards, workplace, and city programs. It builds awareness among people who don't typically engage, and it makes inclusion a normal everyday conversation. It also reduces isolation for Black residents. Oftentimes, people don't realize how much their voice can influence policies. Policies isn't always about big politics. It's about decisions made at school and workplaces and city councils. So what can everyday people do? We can email or call our local representative. We can ask them to support stronger hate crime enforcement, mandatory anti-racism training in public institutions, community grants for Black-led organizations, and better protection for immigrants and refugees. These emails matter more than most people think as politicians track public input. We want to also attend or watch city council meetings, many of which are online, as this raises concerns such as increasing funding for youth program, improved safety around racist harassments, and support for community centers in Black neighborhood. We want to also push our workplace to adopt equity policies, which include anonymous reporting for discrimination, clear anti-hate stance in employment handbook, and diversity hiring. Why does this matter in fighting white supremacy? Here's the thing. White supremacy groups grow faster where hate crimes are not tracked properly. Public officials are silent and schools and workplaces have weak policies. So strong policies makes it harder for hate to operate openly and spread. Okay, so we've spoken a lot about anti-Black hate, white supremacist group, how to identify them, what they look like today, and how they recruit. We'll now turn our attention to ourselves and the trauma and how we cope with the trauma that anti-Black hate might have caused. The extensive history and present-day exposure to anti-Black hate has a significant impact on our overall health and our well-being as Black people. And this is called racial trauma. Racial trauma refers to the mental and emotional injury resulting from racism, racial discrimination, stereotype, hate crimes, and other race-related stressors experienced directly or indirectly. So when I said directly or indirectly, when you experience anti-Black hate, personally, that is called direct trauma. And if you experience it against somebody else, you are a witness, then that is indirect experience of racial trauma. In order to better understand and heal from the holistic impact of anti-Black hate on our minds and our bodies, we need to look at racial trauma from a biopsychosocial perspective. So the biopsychosocial model is a framework using social work and other disciplines for understanding a person's well-being and challenges by integrating their body, their mind, and their environment. Biologically, experiences of anti-Black hate has an impact on our person, our body, biologically in multiple ways. It all starts with the amygdala, and the amygdala is a part of the brain that responsible for processing emotions such as fear and anxiety. It's also responsible for attaching emotional significance to memories and help to form new memories. So the amygdala is known as the fear center of the brain. So what happens when you experience incidents of racism? Your brain, in an effort to protect you, recognize the pattern or the threat to help you respond quicker to potential threats and also increase your chances of survival. It kicks in your nervous system and your body responds to anti-Black hate by triggering the amygdala because it recognizes it as a threat to your life and your safety. Psychologically, experiencing racial trauma impacts the way we think and process information about ourselves or others. For example, our brain perceives a threat due to anti-Black hate. We may become hypervigilant and we may look for ways to mitigate potential threat. And also socially, racial trauma impact the way we interact with each other on a social level. It is important to keep in mind that everyone's response to racial trauma will be different. It is normal and expected to be impacted by racial trauma, but it doesn't mean that something is wrong with you. Your body and your mind and your emotion are simply reacting to legitimate and real threat against your safety. The good thing is that once you're able to identify and name what's going on, you are then able to develop healthy coping mechanism to help you heal and support others in their healing journey. We want to look at what the story that we tell ourselves when we come across an incident of hate. We need to tell ourselves a helpful story. After you experience an incident of anti-Black hate, how do you feel? You may feel upset, you may feel small, you may feel angry. All of these feelings, emotional reactions are normal. So overcoming anti-Black hate has two main components: a story you tell yourself about what happened and how you choose to cope with what happened. So let's look at coping with the psychological impact. First, you have control over the story you tell yourself after an incident of anti-Black hate takes place. You need to understand that you are not the problem. Your Blackness is not the problem. And we also don't want to harbor hate in our hearts towards the people who committed anti-Black hate towards us. Helpful story to tell ourselves is that there's nothing wrong with me and I'll never be good enough because of the color of my skin is not a helpful story to tell yourself. These are unhelpful stories. On the other hand, helpful stories that you want to tell yourself is, my skin is beautiful and I have a rich culture, regardless of what people or someone else may think of me. You want to tell yourself that I am safe in my body and I belong here. You want to tell yourself that my worth is not up for debate. So these are helpful stories you want to tell yourself to cope with the psychological impact of racial trauma. So let's look at promoting our wellness. Given the long history of anti-Black racism and anti-Black hate that we have experienced and continue to experience, and the impact of racial trauma, it is important that we learn how to cope effectively and move towards wellness. In the moments following incidents, our nervous system will likely respond quite quickly, causing us to experience symptoms like shock, racing heart rate, or sweaty palms. Over time, we may develop prolonged depression, low self-esteem, and poor self-image. Here are a few things you can do to calm your nervous system down. You want to do things like closing your eyes to limit the amount of information that your mind is taking in. You want to take slow, deep breaths, inhale through your nose and feel your diaphragm, hold for 3 seconds and release through your mouth. You want to practice grounding exercise, pause in the moment and name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, and 3 things you can smell, 2 things you can hear, and 1 thing you can taste. And also you want to repeat positive affirmations like we went through earlier. A few additional things we want to do is we want to talk about it. See, a problem share is a problem half solved. Collective healing can come from sharing our experiences in a trusted community or with trauma-informed, culturally appropriate, licensed mental health care professionals. It helps us to feel heard and seen, which can calm our nervous system down. We want to focus on empowerment, focus on the way we can take control or have positive influence on our mental and emotional health. We want to engage in healing and self-care practices, which help us to counteract the impact of stress on our body and our mind. We want to listen to music. We want to practice breathing exercise and mindful meditation, and we want to practice gratitude. So let's look at resistance and resilience. So over the years, we have seen Black Canadian civil rights leader blaze trail in addressing the decades of oppression we face as Black people in Canada. They have played a crucial role in confronting anti-Black hate, systemic racism, and social exclusion. Yet, there is still much work to be done, and we as proud Black Canadians must carry the torch. We must continue to exude resilience. We must resist oppression and the negative notion that has been painted about us as a people over the years. Also, we must continue to reach for progress and in eradicating anti-Black hate. We must continue to lobby for legal reforms, and we must come together in solidarity as a community to empower our culture. Fighting anti-Black hate as a people is a collective effort. It's a multifaceted journey requiring self-awareness, community building, systemic advocacy, and pride in our culture. We should not feel responsible for the hate we have to cope with as a community. However, we hold the power in shaping the narrative, building resilience, and driving change for ourselves and future generations. In completing this presentation, let us continue to celebrate all forms of Blackness. Let us continue to encourage unity among ourselves. Let us shun language and jokes that degrade any form of Blackness. And let us remember that anti-Black hate is an extreme expression of Black racism. Therefore, to stem anti-Black hate, we must first challenge racism. Thank you so much for your attention, for your participation. Thank you all for coming. If you have any questions, we can take your questions. Thank you to Adrian for supporting. All right, so if there's no further question, we can welcome Adrian.
Yes, thank you so much, Don. Thank you for that informative session on white supremacy. I think there's a lot of very nuanced aspects of white supremacy that you brought up that I, for myself, have learned for the first time in going through your presentation. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your intention, but also carefully walking us through ways in which we could be aware of what's going on around us. Thank you to everyone who came in to attend this webinar as well. We'll be sending out a survey for you to fill out that you should see as soon as you close the Zoom. Your feedback helps us in knowing how we are doing and also ways in which we can improve as well. This is our last session for the year. However, please stay tuned for January and February. We'll be continuing the series and talking about anti-Black hate in regards to interactions with the youth. When it comes to everyday online interactions as well as education, and then also talking about mental health and community resilience too. So please do look out for those sessions as well. And lastly, a huge shout out to the folks at Clio for supporting us as well. And thank you, Helen, for being able to support us with tech support as well. If you have any further questions, feel free to stay behind, but otherwise, we will be wrapping up the session. So thank you very much for your time, everyone. Take care and have an incredible day.